time is 6:03, so we're going to do a minute or two more and then start at 6:05. And thank you, Randy. It's kind of comforting, actually. I have rotary dial phones in my house, and watching kids trying to figure that out is always entertaining. You got something. All right, it's 6:04, so we might as well give this a shot. So we're going to call this meeting to order at 6:04. And can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I guess we don't have a flag, do we? It's okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, can I ask the clerk for a roll call?
Committee member Rock is absent. Committee member Davis is here. Committee member Cara is absent. Vice Chair Bush.
I'm here.
And Chair Burke.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Fantastic. Thank you. Can you please make an announcement about the Levine Act, please?
Would any members like to make any Levine Act resolutions? Hearing none, we do not have any resolutions.
Thank you. Are there any public speakers on general public input at this point?
Do we have any? I'm sorry. Did you want to speak to journal public input?
No.
Did you? We do not have any speakers for general public input.
Thank you. Next item, do we have any public speakers on the special agenda or consent items?
We have a request to speak. Okay. We do not.
Okay. There are no public speakers on the special agenda or consent items.
That's correct.
On the consent calendar, we have approval of minutes for August 15th, 2023, November 1st, 21st of 23, February 20th of 24, and May 21 of 2024. And the only thing I saw was a typo on one of these things.
Page 3 of the August 15th.
You mean, yes, and what was that typo?
Well, it says DI, I'm assuming that should be did. It's about 6 lines
That's
up.
exactly the one I saw.
6 lines up from the bottom. Again, that's page 3, August 15th, 2023.
All right. With the exception of that, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion provided by Committee Member Davis, seconded by Committee Member Bush. Can we have a voice vote, please?
Committee member Ross is absent. Committee member Davis.
Yes.
Committee member Carr is absent. Vice Chair Bush.
Yes.
And Chair Burke.
Yes.
Motion passes, and was that with the exception of the 1 minutes, or?
No, we're assuming that the typo will be fixed.
Okay, and this was August.
The August 15, 2023, page 3.
About 6 lines up from the bottom.
Okay.
And it's, I'm sorry, 6 lines from the
I'm
bottom.
sorry, might be 8 lines up from the bottom. On page 3 of the August 15th, 2023, right by
Oh, I
the
see.
41st.
Okay. Yes, we will correct that.
thought I had a printout for the clerk, but I did not. Are there, question to the clerk, are there any public speakers on the remaining agenda items?
I do not have any requests to speak.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to number 5, staff administrative items. And first up is interim fieldwork update by LSL. Can we get a staff presentation?
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to give you all an update as to where we're at on the 2024 financial audit. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ryan Long. I'm a partner with LSL CPAs for this year's audit. And to start off, I was pleasantly surprised by the traffic coming up from Mountain Valley today. It only took me 50 minutes, which was pretty impressive. So, getting into the team, just as a reminder, this is
A little louder, or get the microphone closer. Is it on? I don't think it's on.
The ventilation integrated testing. Testing. Can you hear me now? Oh, but I don't think there's a mic on. Okay. All right. Maybe if I move away from the ventilation a little bit. Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So again, just our contact information, my email right there, and then Calvin, who is the manager working with me to supervise the audit, his email as well. Please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions about the audit process or want to know where we're at. So just as a reminder, the scope of our engagement, we've been engaged by the city to perform a financial audit for the year ended June 30, 2024. The scope of this audit is the city's annual comprehensive financial report, the standalone financial statements for the Big Blue Bus, single audit over the city's major federal award programs, compliance audit over the AB 2766 fund, and also some agreed upon procedures over the National Transit Database report, and also REACT, which kind of gets lumped into the same audit for housing urban development. So, as part of an audit, management has some responsibilities, the auditors have responsibilities. So, in short, management is kind of responsible for the fair presentation of the financial statements. They're responsible for putting it together, making sure that all the numbers in it are accurate and correct and fairly stated. Just because we're checking their work doesn't negate their responsibility. Ultimately, they are management statements, not LSLs. Management is also responsible for designing and implementing effective internal controls. Internal controls are the policies, procedures, processes that are in place to make sure that the numbers that are generated and ultimately find their way into the financial statements are accurate and correct. And finally, management is responsible to not only put together accurate numbers, but also evaluate those numbers and let us know if they think that there's going to be any sort of severe financial hardship within the next 12 months. In the accounting profession, we call that going concern doubt. So, going concern, it sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing. A going concern doubt is a bad thing. What are my responsibilities? So my responsibilities as the auditor are to perform a financial, not a forensic audit. Those are two very different things. I'm checking the numbers, I'm gathering evidence to make sure that the financial statements are accurate in all material respects. I'm not, nobody's alerted me thus far to any sort of fraudulent activities or misappropriation of assets that require me to dig deeper under the rock, which would kind of constitute a forensic audit. Once we're done with our audit, and as we're going through that process, it's my job to communicate any sort of control deficiencies in the internal control processes. If we come across any fraud, we'll obviously report that. If we come across any waste or abuse, we are also required to report those. We are going to maintain our professional judgment and skepticism, meaning we don't take everything that management tells us at face value. We need to make sure it's corroborated by sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And we're also required to maintain independence, so that way there's no sort of undue influence between management and us, so that you can trust that what we're telling you is accurate is in fact accurate. The other thing we have to do is identify risks to material misstatements. So this is where things could go wrong in the financial statements. We have to think about that, identify them, and then develop procedures to respond to those risks. We have to understand what the city's internal control processes are so we can develop audit procedures and also report back on any control deficiencies that there might be. It is a little bit different from a private sector SEC type audit. We're not rendering an opinion on those internal controls. We're simply saying whether or not we believe they are functioning correctly and if we've identified any weaknesses. We're not saying, yes, these are awesome, but rather is we didn't find anything bad. There's a little bit of a difference between the two. We'll obviously look at the accounting policies and any estimates that go into the financial statements, making sure that they are reasonable and appropriate. And then finally, we will also do our own evaluation of the city's finances to see if there's any sort of going concern out at the end of the year. So our audit plan is actually, we're kind of in the middle of it. So we did wrap up interim field work, which is what we call phase 1 of the audit. We did this back in April. During that time, this is when we did look at the internal controls. We provided feedback to management. We performed our audit risk assessment, and we developed the procedures that we're going to do in November to respond to any risks that we identified. So when we come back, do the actual final audit field work, the stuff that everybody thinks of as the audit. We'll do the detailed test of account balances and transactions. We'll test compliance with laws, regulations, debt covenants, grant agreements, etc., as well as any other procedures necessary to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. One thing I always want to mention in these introductory type kickoff presentations is materiality. What that essentially means is we don't look at 100% of transactions. In a city of Santa Monica size, we could be doing that for years and probably not finish the audit. So we have to develop thresholds following professional standards as to what transactions we're going to test, in terms of dollar value, quantitative things, as well as qualitative. Like, if this particular transaction is off, would it change the reader's perception of the financial statements? Would they make different decisions based on that information? So the best example I could give you is, if $10 is the difference between being in compliance with a bond covenant and being out of compliance with a bond covenant, $10 becomes material. Whereas, maybe in a certain circumstance, it could be as high as $1 million, depending on the amount of funds and money flowing through. So it is, there is judgment involved here, and there are calculations that are out there that we use that are put out by the industry to make sure we're getting all the transactions that we need to test. Okay, audit risks and responses. So I mentioned we finished our risk assessment, and so I'm going to kind of just go over a few of the risk areas that we did identify. The first two on this slide are not unique to the city of Santa Monica. These are broad risk factors that we have to consider in every audit engagement, regardless if it's a city. We work with a lot of auto dealerships and manufacturers, so all of our audits, we have to consider these. Management override of controls is essentially you have a system and a process in place, and manager comes in and says, no, we're not going to do that. I just want you to post this journal entry and do this instead. So that's one risk we have to consider. We have tests of journal entries to make sure that that is not happening. Improper revenue recognition due to fraud is the other one. It's pulling revenues that belong in a different fiscal period into the current fiscal period to make it look better than it actually is. Again, we have procedures as part of our audit plan, our standard audit plan, to respond to these risks to make sure that none of this type of activity is happening. So, based on our understanding of the city and our interim test work, we did identify these three specific risks. The first one is completeness of the SEPA. The city has a large amount of grant programs. Historically, it's not been an issue, but due to the volume of the grants and the scrutiny, being a REACT city, we have to perform additional procedures on the SEPA, the schedule of expenditures and federal awards, just to make sure nothing's missing and that we are actually capturing all of the expenditures that get reported to the federal government. The other one here is significant estimation required in the pension and other post-employment benefits liabilities. These numbers are generated by actuaries, essentially. So CalPERS or other actuaries. And so those groups get sent data from the city to develop their estimation of what the liability is. And we evaluate all of that underlying employee census data, making sure that the actuarial groups have accurate data with which to derive their numbers. And then finally, just the note and loan receivable balances. As this subcommittee is aware, there's a large amount of loan and note receivables out there. So we have procedures to make sure that all of that is being captured and reported properly this year. Okay, so that's our risk assessment, and so our report from interim was generally positive, actually very positive. We did not identify any items at this time that we consider to be a significant deficiency or material weakness. All of it seems to be functioning as properly designed when we looked at it. The only item that we really identified was in the timing of the completion of some reconciliations, primarily due to some staffing shortages that the city is currently facing. The bank recs and submission of the reports were done correctly. They were just submitted to council a little bit later than what we would normally like to see. So the other item is no doubt going to get cleaned up. We've never had an issue with this during our final year-end audit with the receivables. Sub-ledger, the general ledger, there were some discrepancies in those balances that will no doubt be cleaned up before our final audit. We've never had an issue with it in the past. So we have communicated both of these items to management. They're aware of it, and so should be correct. That is where we're at, what we've done, and what we're planning on doing. So do you have any questions? Happy to take them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had two questions. I know that there was some transfers between different funds. Is that something that's a part of your audit? You go ahead and track those?
Yes, 100%. We test the interfund transfers every year.
And is it obvious where or how those transfers are done?
Yes, so right now, what we do at this phase of the testing is we don't really dive deep into making sure that they're correct and authorized. We want to make sure that right now they are netting to zero. That if it's transferred from one fund, it's actually the same amount in the other fund where it was received. When we come back at year end, we will actually look at the purpose of the transfer and the authorization to make sure that they were all authorized, following the proper protocols, and that they are for the correct purposes.
And, okay. The other question I had is with respect to possible litigation expenses. Is that something you guys look at?
Litigation is something that we will look at. It's not something we've looked at yet. So every year we do communicate with the city's attorney's office to see if what litigation is out there, if there's anything that should be reported in the financial report or accrued or otherwise disclosed. So that's something we've not done yet, but we will do. Yes, sir.
So just following on that question, what's the, for contingent liability, at what point does it get disclosed and quantified versus not disclosed, or disclosed but not quantified?
Sure. So it gets disclosed, but not quantified if there is essentially a likelihood of it happening. So if it's more likely than not to occur, if you just don't know what the amount is going to be yet, there's a disclosure requirement there, which generally estimate like a range of what you think it will be. If you know the amount and it's more likely than not to happen, it should be accrued, depending on when that liability was incurred. And then the other one is if it's not likely to happen, you don't necessarily have to accrue if it's a remote possibility. So there's a range of actions.
The disclosures I've seen in the financial statements so far generally don't quantify them. So you're saying if there's a sense of what the number is, you're going to give a range. But a lot of times I've just simply seen a disclosure of a contingent liability, but not a quantification.
Yeah, so it does It does depend. So when we get the confirmations from the attorney's office, if they don't give us a quantifiable number in that confirmation, it's hard for us to know necessarily what that is and check it. Most of the time, what we see is stuff like this litigation has closed, and if that's the case, we go through the accrued liability for it, making sure that there is something in there. If it's ongoing, they will either tell us like it just started, in which case there's not an outcome that can be feasibly known at this point. That's usually the two that we see. It's not usually one where it's like in the middle of it or near the end and they have a number or an estimate. It's a little messy at times reading those confirmations from the attorneys.
And given the number of like slip and fall and, you know,
Oh, yeah.
all that kind of stuff, right? So you circulate throughout the in-house legal staff as well as the outside staff,
Yes.
and then compile all that. And
Yeah, we definitely get all those loss reports, the accrual, the estimations that go into what the incurred but not reported is what it's called, like what the city thinks the liability is out there. You know, we make sure that it actually has some support behind it that makes sense and that they're using a reasonable loss range on that.
Okay, can you help me out with, I'm trying to wrap my head around, in a municipal scenario, what is a going concern kind of test? Because the credit rating of the city's general obligation bonds are not related. They're basically related to the city's taxing ability and primarily on the untaxed capacity of the real estate in the city. So it seems to me that the city could be triple rated right up until the point that somebody basically says that it's insolvent. So I'm confused. Can you walk us through what does that look like? You know, between what is the definition and test for insolvency, and what is can the city still have a AAA rated credit rating?
Sure.
Even in that situation?
Okay, so going concern for a government is a lot different than what it would be in the private sector, right? So if you have a going concern out in the private sector, there's a good chance your business is going to close doors and you're done within 12 months or something like that. Governments are not don't really function like that. Like as we saw with I think San Bernardino in Orange County a few years ago, they both went bankrupt, but they're still around operating today. So it is a little bit different for government. It's not like if the city becomes insolvent, the doors close and everything's done. So what we look for in going concern is essentially we look at liquidity ratios, making sure that the debt to total assets, debt to total reserves, those types of things, total reserves to next year's spending, essentially. Making sure that those are all within, best practice parameters from the GFOA, industry standards, things like that. So, realistically, what would constitute a going concern now for us, if we were to report on it, would be significant debt exceeding the ability to make next year's payments. So if your cash flows are such that, you're looking like you're going to default on bonds potentially or other debts, or if there is a situation perhaps where your current reserves don't cover enough of next year's expenditures, budgeted expenditures, that could be a cause for concern as well. But it is actually very rare for there to be a going concern out in government just due to the nature of, we're running out of money, here comes some more grants to, fund it or something along those lines. It's very rare for government to
But what you're saying, though, is that you could actually declare a going concern in the financial statements, and the general obligation bonds could still have a AAA rating.
No, probably not. Because the bondholders, the rating agencies would read those financial statements, they would see the going concern out, and then that would probably be an instant date to the credit rating.
Got it. Okay. Can you explain or go a little bit more into the difference between a private company and the city as far as the opinion or non-opinion on internal control testing?
Yes.
And how does that impact the actual scope, depth, and comprehensiveness of that testing?
Sure. So if you were to go to the, look up an SEC publicly traded company, they actually receive 2 audit opinion reports essentially. They have an audit opinion on their internal controls as well as an audit opinion on their numbers. So in those types of audits, the auditor is actually taking samples. They are diving deep into the internal controls to not only see if it's functioning, it's designed properly, it's functioning, but also they're verifying it through a large sampling case to make sure that it is there's no errors running through. So they actually have enough data and evidence to write an opinion that says, in our opinion, these internal controls are properly designed, properly implemented, and functioning correctly. What we do on the government side is not that detailed. We are only required to gain an understanding of what the internal control procedures and policies are. We may, at our discretion, take a larger sample, but there's no requirement to do that. And then ultimately, we're not reporting on the internal controls. So we're not issuing a separate letter saying that, in our opinion, this is good. We issue a letter that says, we looked at the internal controls for the purposes of planning this audit. Nothing came to our attention that was bad, essentially. So instead of saying, yes, everything's good, we're saying we didn't find anything bad. So there's a little bit of a difference. There could be stuff that's out there that we didn't see, didn't test, whereas in a publicly traded audit, they're testing a lot more.
But how much are you testing then? Now, you're saying that nothing came to your attention, but is that from testing or is that just from talking to staff?
So we do test. We just don't take the large samples that you would find in a publicly traded audit. We might sample, a couple of transactions during that cycle to validate, like, okay, if staff is telling us that they stamp paid on that invoice before it gets paid or after it gets paid, we will sample maybe 10, 15 of those invoices to make sure that that stamp is actually there as that internal control work, so to speak. We're not going to sample, if there's thousands of those that happen during a year, we're not going to sample like 260 of them or something along those lines, like what you would see in a public sector audit. We might just take 10, 12, something like that, just to verify it.
So this is standard across all government
Yes.
entities?
It's actually standard not only for government, but any audit that's not a publicly traded audit.
Got it. Okay. As far as the grants programs and the view that you're going to take on the grants programs,
Yes.
how is that going to? I believe in the risk analysis there was some discussion about, or maybe it was the grant. I forget if it was the Moss Adams grants study. Number one, do you take in that area, do you take what Moss Adams does to inform what you're doing?
So we do get the reports from Moss Adams, and they do inform us to a degree. So where there is intersection between their work and what we're going to end up doing, we do take a look at their reports, use it to plan our audit procedure. Not necessarily rely on the work that they do, we do our own work, but we will see if they came up with anything that we should be aware of and go from there. For the single audit, though, there are particular testing parameters about what programs that we test. So the federal government has a very specific checklist as to help us pick which programs we have to test. Oftentimes, it's almost every year. In fact, it is every year, the Section 8 program. We have to test that one every year. And then after that, we just have to get sufficient coverage to meet the federal requirements. We try to do it on a rotating basis. But for example, if Moss Adams were to look at a grant program that didn't meet our threshold, we probably would not retest what they did if we had sufficient coverage to meet the other federal requirements.
When you do this type of focused review, is your testing of the internal controls at a level that's higher than your general testing of internal controls?
Yes. So for the federal programs, we do actually have to take samples of internal controls and test that in much more detail.
So would you say it kind of approaches a private company audit for the amount that you're testing?
We're still not issuing an opinion on it, but we are taking a much larger sample than we would otherwise take.
Great. So on the, is there going to be, now, other than those 3 areas that you identified, is there any others more or less kind of informal special focus that you're going to be guided by in this year's audit?
Yes. So every year we try to, as auditors, we try to implement an element of randomness, making sure that, we're not testing in super detail everything every year. We obviously can't do that, but we try to rotate every year where our focus is going to be. And this year it's actually going to be on revenues and receivables. We're going to be spending a lot more time on that.
Got it. And then that dovetails into my last question, which is, this subcommittee had approved a update to the reporting of notes receivable. Is that going to be included in the FY23 financial statements?
The 24 financial statements.
Oh, the 24. I'm sorry. Yes. Excuse me.
Yeah, we'll want to make sure that what you had approved is included in this.
Fantastic. Are there any other questions on the audit? Okay. We're good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Purple, I understand too, we requested some.
And they are from the general public? Okay, can we, we'll insert them into the agenda at this point.
The first speaker is John Evans for 2 minutes.
Okay?
Mr. Allen, would you like to set the
Chair Mark and Jeff, I can wait until like 6 for comment if you want to keep the meeting going, or I can touch it.
We asked if there were speakers on item 6, and we asked that question before you came in, so.
Yeah, then downstairs it's blocked by these some altercations, so that's why I'm told there's questions like that.
Well, we
So
can
if you want me
hear
to
you
speak
right
now?
now.
No, go ahead.
Okay, we don't understand.
Anywhere.
Shouldn't he go to the podium? Remember we talked about this last
Then we
time?
can all see him.
Huh?
Then we
Okay.
can all see him.
Sure.
When he's over there, we can all see him better.
Yeah, he should go to the podium. That's what we decided last meeting, that all speakers.
I don't
would
remember
speak
that
from the
conversation,
podium.
but,
We had that conversation,
well, my Alzheimer's is keeping it clear.
obviously.
Thank you. There's no microphone there, so.
My first point is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Go.
The importance of this committee meeting requires it be held in
Louder.
the council chambers. It's too important. And the audio of this for the public to hear after is very difficult. And it should be visual, just as the other committee meetings are that are held in the chamber. These meetings started, I'll remind everybody, circa 2014 when LA County Civil Grand Jury found that Santa Monica was one of the most financially mismanaged cities of all of LA County's 88 cities. The auditing firm the city selected, Moss Adams, back then, is still working. Leases are 5 years. Council terms are 4 years. Restaurants stay open 5 years, rebrand themselves. Moss Adams is lax, still conducting virtual audits, waiting 9 months to a year for answers from nonprofits, from the city staff, and recipients of homeless service grants. Moss Adams has done a superficial and incomplete job. We need fresh faces and a firm with no ties whatsoever to the city. Council members or employees. Staff should not be selecting and interviewing the candidates. This committee should. And Moss Adams' replacement should not be providing accounting advice to the people concerned, St. Joseph Center, and others. The city manager and staff, in this case, especially David White, should not review and edit the auditor's findings prior to this committee and the city council and the public reviewing it. This is important, and I'll tell you why it's important.
One more minute?
Yeah, 1 more minute.
1 more minute.
need open and full disclosure of how they're sued. But there needs to be a full investigation as to why our city manager, who's in charge of this and most items here in the city, did not disclose on his application to become city manager, or his resume, or in conversations with council members, his trouble in removal from his post as city manager several years ago in Fairfield. There in Fairfield, city staff whistleblower brought to light that he was fired, providing evidence that David White mishandled $685,000 plus funds, HUD funds. Fairfield had to repay the U.S. Treasury that money and had to pay the whistleblower who was doing his job in excess of $129,000 plus legal fees. When this fact was brought up to a group, Phil Roth's comment was, FUCK, I didn't know this. Had we known it, my colleagues known it, he would have never been hired. He was our fourth choice.
Can we-
John, we're good. I think we're good. Thank you.
I just want to say we need to be run by a group that cares.
Yes.
And so far, we have too many answers that aren't being heard.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our second speaker is Denise Burke. Thank you.
Just a couple of things from the budget this year.
A little louder, Denise. There's no microphone.
Just a couple of things from the budget this year. The May 2024 staff report, attachment A, which I believe is the staff report attachment of the budget. But for the attachment A, there's adjustments. Mathematical accounting errors. They've not been corrected and could be as much as $800,000. And then for this change, for these new positions, they have one that be paid forward to the left, something reported. And then the transfer of funds for the Powell lawsuit and for the pandemic. I know for the Powell lawsuit, the city council had an agenda item to replace them, but in the budget, they're deferring payment back restricted funds and solicitor. They were paid to pay the lawsuit. The committee or the airport, the money of the airport, not even mentioned, as well as all the funds you did get to do. And so it's just a thing about what we do to as well.
Thank you. And that's Hartman's our last speaker.
Thank you. I would just like to, can we just make a comment?
Couldn't hear what he said.
Before, in all future meetings, we need to have functioning AV and microphones. So, I don't know who we make this request of, because this is a bit challenging. Thank you. Okay. We went through questions. Can I get a motion to receive and file the LSL report on the audit progress?
I'll second.
Moved by Subcommittee Member Bush, seconded by Subcommittee Member Brock. Can we just have a voice vote, please? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That passes. Thank you. That was a little bit out of sequence. Apologies. Next item up is the internal audit work plan from Moss Adams. So can we get the staff presentation, please?
Okay, good evening. It's going to be Laura Schweitzer, Director with Moss Adams. I'll cover the staff's report and then send it over to Steve to talk about the capital program assessment. So tonight you will be hearing the joint dispatch efficiency study. That was a project that was carried over from the prior fiscal year. We completed that work and you'll be receiving that presentation this evening. We also, for this next fiscal year, we have 2 engagements. So we have the capital program best practices assessment, which Steve will be reviewing that work plan. We have so far just kicked off that project, just completed the kickoff meeting. We're also going to be performing a cash handling internal controls review for you starting in January of 2025. And then we just have our ongoing internal audit services to be able to attend meetings like this, as well as coordinate the activities with the city.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve. I'm a partner of Moss Adams, the owner of construction and real estate advisory team. If I say something wrong, it's call me. So good to see everyone again. It's always great to be in Santa Monica. So today, I think at the prior meeting, we went at a high level what the scope of services were. Today, we have a little bit more detail of the work plan that's in the agenda. So at the highest level, the goal of the capital program best practices and effectiveness assessment is to assess the current state, identify opportunities for improving the effectiveness of the city's capital planning and management activities. This is going to cover long-term capital planning, capital budgeting, financial management, capital project execution, and deferred maintenance. Generally, when we do these projects, or actually all projects, we do startup project management, we do fact-finding, analysis, and report writing. For these types of services, we will generally pick between 2 to 3 sample projects. We'll look at policy procedures, strategic planning, policy procedures supporting the capital program. We will interview peer cities. I think we just did the kickoff call recently in Pasadena and Steve Beverly Hills. When there, we also do these types of services for a lot of different cities, school districts, hospitals, etc. So we're going to bring a lot of best practices into our assessment. We leverage GFOA for criteria. They have a really detailed section on best practices for capital planning, and we've also collected some good templates from the team here in terms of best practices or templates that align with best practices that we'll be able to report on. So yeah, I think we have our kickoff call August 15th. We will be getting interviews scheduled end of month, early next with staff and key parties that would like to partake in those interviews. We are on track to deliver our draft report November 12th, our final report November 12th with a presentation November 19th. So we're really looking forward to this project and supporting the city implementing or identifying best practice opportunities.
Questions? For someone that's not as well versed in the area, what is the difference between standards for consulting? That was a phrase that appeared on the slide there, and generally accepted accounting.
Yep, so there's 2 different auditing standards. Our team is well versed in both. For this particular project, it's under AICPA consulting standards. The GAGA standards that we'll do these projects on, and there's a lot more upfront work in terms of paperwork and identifying you have to document a lot more of like what are the risks of the objectives not being met. This is a process improvement, so we're going to leverage a lot of those skill sets of like, hey, what could go wrong, what's the current state, but our focus is on how to get better. So we're going to identify, just like a GAG's performance audit, the criteria in alignment with GFOA, and with those recommendations, it's going to be forward focused on, hey, we identified this is what we should be doing to get better. GAGs, they're generally a lot more specific on methodology. The advisor standards gives us some flexibility on what specifically we want to test on the highest and best value to the city.
I'm sorry, the term, maybe it was the audit, or the audio, so I couldn't put it as a term, but you said the data standards?
GAGs.
Gas. Gasby, right? Is that what
Oh,
you're saying?
yeah, okay, all right, okay, so that's a generally accepted accounting.
Yeah, government auditing
Okay,
standards.
so again, in simple English, the difference is for that type of audit, it's more looking backwards as opposed to looking forward and finding.
Yeah, it's that. It's a lot more specific on the criteria for testing. It's more compliant, or can be more compliance with these types of things. Here, like we're doing interviews, we're reviewing kind of other packages we've done elsewhere, which we have more flexibility to provide recommendations and alignment plans.
Just in terms of tracking how capital is spent, if it's spent effectively or spent as
I mean, we do both under both standards, so I think it wouldn't necessarily matter. I think the flexibility with the consulting standards is we can introduce kind of the surveys, documentation into the analysis.
A couple questions. In another governmental agency in this city, the capital reporting chain of command, for lack of a better term, did not actually plug into the finance director. It basically ended up it terminated in the operating management that was basically requesting and spending funds. So is that kind of, is that going to be included in this review as what the reporting structure is to ensure adequate reporting,
Yep.
all those kinds of internal control issues?
Yep, so we'll be looking at what's your current process for getting the budget approvals, if that includes kind of the holistic outlook of the construction projects, who's authorizing those projects, if the scope is specific enough to really understand what the project is. Sometimes we see people just have kind of charge codes or very high-level descriptions, so we'll want to make sure that there's a good understanding of what that scope is going to be, that it's being authorized by the appropriate parties from a budget perspective. And then we're also going to be looking at project execution, how performance reporting is going to be tracked against those. A common thing that we see is you'll see a project or a capital improvement program, and they're always perfectly on budget. So we'll be going a layer deeper, looking at forecast details, looking at commitments, looking at the expenditure details, and making sure you have a good holistic look at the project. For the sample projects, we'll be evaluating change orders, making sure that they're following public contract code. We're not going to do like change order testing, but it's more of the control testing and how you're reporting it. And the appropriate authorization being occurring, of course.
And basically testing to see if they're actually maintaining up-to-date estimated final costs versus just plugging in the budget and then all of a sudden having a surprise at the 11th hour that, oops, we're waiting on.
So per GFOA, some of the best practice, in addition to budget and commitment, is really understanding change orders, pending change orders, any estimates from the field that would indicate that the project could go over. Generally, we can collect that from getting project management input on are there any pending change orders that are not in the system yet that would drive it over the forecast. Yeah, we definitely include that in our procedures. We recently had a good one in this space where we were doing the budget and then we were getting the estimates from the project managers, and the program at an early stage was over by like 70 million and no one had known about it. So from doing kind of that mathematical calculation, making sure it's being reported, you're able to identify those issues, which are good, so that you can come up with a management plan of what to do. So for that particular entity, since they identified it early enough, they scrapped a couple of projects and did some value engineering on others. So for our sample projects, which will include 2 to 3, we're going to map it, making sure it has those, 1, the reporting lines up, 2, is it holistic, and 3, doesn't have all the components you'd expect in this space.
For large projects, and I don't know who to direct this question to, but is there a threshold before which the council has to approve budget overruns on major capital projects? Or once they're approved, are they on autopilot no matter how expensive they become?
Yeah, if we're going to increase the budget of any of the projects, we have to go to council for approval. Like we can't just increase a project budget without seeking approval first.
Okay. And is there a threshold with that for capital projects, or is it any capital project?
Any modification to an approved budget requires an amendment to the budget, which requires council approval.
And in that amendment to the budget, is the council informed as to what the new estimated final cost of the project is, so they understand what they're voting on?
Part of the application of the project, when it's going to get approved, we notify council whether there was a scope of work that changed or some project costs that increased, which would justify the increase in the budget.
Right, but the council is given the new number, the new estimated final cost number with all these changes baked in, so they know what they're, if it was $100,000, then they know that they're now approving a project that is going to come in at $200,000, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to be testing internal controls in this project?
Yeah, so I think to piggyback on what you were saying, we'll look at change orders for those specific projects. We'll look for the approval process. The common area that we'll see is how data is presented at the approvals. We want that holistic look at like original budget, percent complete, or original budget, this change, and total change to date. So that's a common area that we recommend there. So for I think the changes that you're speaking to, from a change order perspective, we'll see that. I think if we have a project that's had multiple years, we'll look at kind of the budget changes and see how if that's been reported accurately or in line with best practices. Where we have original budget, new budget, and how the budget got approved.
Okay, yeah, and so any approvals that would have been necessary from the council, you'll be making sure, you'll be checking to see if they're included in those projects.
For those 3 projects, we're going to map budgets and change orders. So the high level, low level, making sure we've got all the changes.
How are you going to pick the projects?
We will get the list and we're going to use I think we'll judgmentally sample. Generally we got one that's based off of this, there's one in the planning stage, one that's kind of in the pre-construction phase, one in the construction phase. I'll get the list and then we'll take a look. Generally we like kind of the big ones to focus on. I think if you guys have suggestions, you can, we'll work with the city. We want this product to be the most value to you also. I think there are specific ones you want to either say, hey, this didn't go well, let's use this as a case study of how to get better. We love those. So, but if not, we'll do judgment sample, the biggest and best.
Given your experience, are you going to be using, is every point in this process going to be compared to best practices so that when you deliver the report, they're going to know how they score on each of the areas, from budgeting to financial tracking to reporting, those kinds of things?
We report on exceptions, and for these, since it's a focus on how to get you guys better, or where can you guys improve, we'll rate each of those observations or recommendations high to low, critical, high, medium, low. So we won't rate you per se, but from our experience, like if you guys have some pretty big gaps that could undermine the program or could lead to a lot of cost savings or efficiencies, we're going to rate those high. But we'll document kind of what we went through within our procedures. Whenever we do these, we always come up with some good stuff.
So, for example, standardized reporting, identify, something that gives a structure and a process that provides an early heads up that there could be a problem in this line item or whatever it is.
Correct. And we'll theme it based off like people, processes, technology. We'll kind of go through all the elements you would expect, like procurement, contract administration, expenditure management and controls, performance reporting, capital improvement reporting. So it's pretty broad with what we're looking at, and we're kind of looking for the highest and best value recommendations to the city.
Okay, Doug, did you have a question?
I was going to, Oscar, don't most of the contracts include contingency amounts for overruns for a certain amount?
There are, when we take a project for capital approval, we include a contingency. Generally, it's a 10% contingency.
Right.
So that's the actual approved amount. So that's the guarantee not to exceed amount.
And that's within the contract. We're not doing a contract. We've done contract audits for y'all. We're not going to the contract level. This is the next layer up where it's looking at you guys may have contingency within project budgets, or I'm assuming we generally will see that where you'll get the contract and then the contingency.
Yeah, when we award a contract, we build a contingency for that. But that's separate from a budget, a capital project budget, right? Project budget could be 20 million, the contract could be 10 million within that project budget. And that's what we take to council for a contract. Through the budget process, we take the 20 million to council for approval of the entire budget.
Right, but what he's going to be testing is going to be the project, right? Which would be the contract plus whatever else,
No, the
right?
project, we define a project as the project budget. So that's the one that gets approved by council, the entire budget.
Isn't that what he's testing?
Yeah, but you were describing, or what Doug mentioned about contingency is related to a contract. So a specific contract within a project would be something that would take to council with a contingency. And that's where it would fluctuate based on contingency.
We're not doing a contract audit on this one.
Right, but I mean, I've seen projects that have a contingency at a project level, right?
A contract. The project would have a total project budget not to exceed the amount that council authorized.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll sometimes see contingency both in the project, construction project level, and then at the program level. So I haven't seen the documents yet, but we'll take a look.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Can I get a motion to accept and file the report, please?
I'll second.
Moved by Subcommittee Member Davis, seconded by Subcommittee Member Brock. Voice vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next item up, the Joint Dispatch Efficiency Study.
Okay,
Much better, thank you.
okay, so, we are here to present to you tonight the results of the joint dispatch study. Again, I'm Tammy Schweitzer, Director of Los Adams, helps lead this work. I just wanted to start out with just a little bit of context around the Joint Dispatch Center. So this was a center that was created back in 2015 where police and fire dispatch came together all within one center. That was organized under the city manager's office and from the Office of Emergency Management. And they developed service level agreements with both police and fire to take on these dispatch services. There was an operating agreement that was put into place at that time. And so we were asked to come in and take a look at the efficacy of this consolidated dispatch center and how it's working now that it's been about 10 years. And also because there have been some staffing challenges within the Joint Dispatch Center. This is not something that is unique to the city of Santa Monica. This is something that was felt by Joint Dispatch Centers across the nation,
Can you,
particularly.
just one question. What's the difference between the Joint Dispatch Center and the Public Safety Communications Division?
They're the same.
Got it, okay.
If you have a preferred preference, we can use one term or.
Let's just use the terms that are in the report so it can be helpful, right?
Sure, so I believe that's PSC, Public Safety Communications
Division.
Division.
All
Yes,
right.
an Office of Emergency Management. So, that is why we were here to do this work. Today we'll be talking through our objectives and scope, as well as our methodology, commendations, and some of our key observations and recommendations. Again, the study was designed to evaluate the effectiveness of the Public Safety Communications Division, in particular looking at how well that consolidated model is working, as well as looking at staffing and organizational structure, which included looking at supervisory and manager level staff within the Public Safety Communications Division, as well as the placement within the Office of Emergency Management and the City Manager's Office. Again, this was really brought on because of the challenges with staffing that the PSC was experiencing throughout the pandemic. There's a number of different statistics within the report that really demonstrate that the city of Santa Monica was not alone in experiencing a lot of those challenges. And we know that it's been a primary focus of the city and management to be able to help alleviate some of those staffing challenges. From a methodology perspective, we conducted interviews with PSC leadership and frontline staff, as well as supervisors. We also met with police and fire chiefs and representatives that each have a designated liaison within their departments that works with OEM on the public safety communications work. And then we also met with HR. We reviewed a number of documents, including policies, procedures, job descriptions, organizational charts, overtime utilization, training records, things like that, to be able to understand what was going on within the PSC, as well as conducting some peer benchmarking with other joint dispatch centers within the state of California. There aren't a ton of joint dispatch centers within the state of California, but we did work with the city to select 5 peer cities to be able to look at, which included the city of Marietta, San Francisco, Santa Maria, as well as Long Beach and Napa, my personal favorite, in terms of a location to go visit. So those are the 5 areas that had joint dispatch centers where police and fire were combined. Because of the nature of this work, we did not use that information from peers to inform our staffing recommendations. There's instead an industry standard formula, but it was useful to be able to connect with peers and learn about their organizational structure, their supervisory structure, their training programs, and things like that. So with that, I'll pass it over to Maria to present the results.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy. My name is Maria Straub. I'm a senior manager at Moss Adams, and I manage this audit for this project. So I wanted to start with some commendations, some things that we identified that are going really well. We did find that, as Tammy mentioned, PSC established service level agreements with both police and fire departments. These agreements clearly outline roles and responsibilities and performance expectations between the parties, and having service level agreements documented is a best practice to really clarify roles and responsibilities when you have multiple parties working on an initiative together. We also found that collaboration between PSC and the police and fire departments has improved in recent years. As Tammy mentioned, there are committees in place that help to facilitate the communication, the coordination, and the collaboration between the 3 parties that have been really effective for the department, and both police and fire leadership reported that as well. These next 2 commendations are related to service delivery, obviously really important for a public safety dispatch center, really the core of why they're doing what they're doing. We found that PSC staff are committed to high quality service delivery, and between fiscal year 2019 and 2023, which is the time period that we studied, we found that PSC consistently met both state and internally established standards for call answering times. We also saw that recent survey results suggest members of the public who called 911 and responded to a survey that the city does on public safety customer service are generally satisfied with dispatch services. 2 more commendations here. One of the key themes you'll hear throughout the presentation today, and that you'll read in the report, is related to the challenges with staffing that PSC has faced, also what Tammy mentioned previously. We did find that the city has acted to address those challenges, though, to address turnover and also to fill vacancies within PSC. Again, both turnover and challenges filling vacancies are challenges that dispatch centers across the nation are facing. All of the peers we spoke to are facing these challenges, and in the work that we have with other cities, we see this really, really commonly. And the city has both conducted a compensation study, which they did in 2023, and implemented salary increases to enhance competitiveness in the market there, and also reviewed hiring requirements for public safety dispatchers and adjusted these processes to reduce barriers. Both of these actions are aligned with best practice and industry standard in terms of how to reduce turnover and increase the ability to fill vacancies, and are also practices that the peers we spoke to have implemented in recent years and found success with as well. So we really commend the city and PSC management for implementing those practices. We also saw that the city adopted a new computer-aided dispatch system in 2023 to support more effective management of incident information. And of course, having a well-functioning system to support operations is really important, especially when you're dealing with staffing challenges in terms of being able to make sure that things are operating as efficiently as possible so that you can support staff in their work. So we also wanted to recognize that. So talking about our observations, I mentioned already that a key theme throughout this report and our presentation is that there have been challenges with staffing in recent years. These challenges relate to the budgeting staffing levels, but also to increased turnover in recent years and challenges with filling vacancies. Again, things that we're seeing across the nation. So PSC budgeted staffing includes a public safety administrator who oversees day-to-day operations, 5 supervisors, and 23 public safety dispatchers, as well as a staff assistant. And the way that PSC sets minimum staffing levels is that they use the state's a forecast that the state has that is based on an industry standard formula called the Early C formula. So Tammy mentioned that. So instead of sort of comparing to other cities, the sort of best practice standard in this industry is to use that formula and to use that to inform staffing standards. And so the state has a staffing forecast that is based on that formula. They provide to the city uses that, and that's how minimum staffing standards are set. One of the challenges with the staffing forecast, though, is that it's important to be really aware that it doesn't take into account turnover and it doesn't take into account employee leave. So it's really based on that. We have everyone here fully staffed all the time, no one's ever out, and we don't have any turnover. It's sort of that best kind of ideal situation, which is just not realistic. So what we found is that those minimum staffing levels then do not accommodate for employee turnover or leave. And then again, similar to other public safety dispatch agencies, PSC has experienced challenges with turnover and has had difficulty filling vacancies, which just exacerbates that challenge, right, of not being sort of fully staffed at the level that we would expect to see. And all of this has resulted in an increase in mandatory overtime. Overtime is really common in public safety agencies, including in dispatch. Mandatory overtime, when it starts to get really high, especially, can be a significant challenge. It can impact operations, service delivery, and also employee morale. So we want to make sure that mandatory overtime is not at too high of a level, and there has been a pretty significant increase at the city. And then, of course, as I mentioned, these challenges have negatively impacted employee morale, cross training, and contributed to staff burnout. So, recommendations here, we calculated the net available hours per employee to determine the number of dispatchers that the city would need to better accommodate the actual employee work hours that the city has available. A limitation here is that this isn't in calculating in turnover, but it does provide a little bit better and a little bit clearer of a picture of the staffing needs in the dispatch center. And what we found in this analysis is that the city should consider adding 3 public safety dispatchers to its budgeted staffing levels to better accommodate for employee leave and actual work hours. We also recommended that the city continue using light-duty police officers and non-sworn personnel from the police and fire departments to fill staffing gaps when needed. This is a practice that PSC has already implemented, is already engaging in, and is also a practice that we've heard from peers they have also used and found to be successful. So we just recommended continuing to do that work. We also compared PSC's organizational structure to peers. We found that overall, generally, PSC's organizational structure and their staff to supervisor ratio is comparable to the peers that we reviewed. As you can see in the table, PSC's dispatcher to supervisor ratio is 4.6. That means that there's 1 dispatcher per 4.6 supervisors. And the average is 4.77, so pretty close. We also, I did want to just point out that we calculated this using a ratio because we certainly recognize that San Francisco is a much bigger city. So calculating as a ratio versus comparing just raw numbers makes those numbers a little bit more comparable across the cities. What we did find in terms of organizational structure as an opportunity for the city to consider is that some of the peers we spoke to have lead dispatch positions that really provide an opportunity for dispatchers to grow, to advance, and also to provide increased oversight and coaching and development for more junior level dispatchers. Both Long Beach and Napa have lead dispatchers, and the city of Marietta is moving toward that model based on what they've seen and their needs. So we recommended that this is something the city consider because adding lead roles would support the city in enhancing these areas. So just to connect those 3 positions I mentioned, considering adding, those could be lead positions, for example. So these challenges with understaffing and the increased use of mandatory overtime, as I mentioned, that really can negatively impact employee morale, and that is something that we observed in this work. Employee morale is obviously incredibly important because when it is low, employees can tend to become disengaged, maybe less productive, they're more likely to call out, they're more likely to leave the job altogether. So it's really important to focus on this, and PSC management has been working really diligently to improve employee morale across the organization despite the challenges with staffing, and to communicate effectively as well to staff about the changes that they're implementing in terms of improving employee morale. So we made a few recommendations in this area, and industry trends are really focused on enhancing employee health and employee mental health and employee wellness initiatives for employees. So a couple of the recommendations are in that area, continuing to encourage the use of existing mental health and wellness support services, and also exploring and just checking in and making sure that those services are meeting the needs of our staff on sort of an ongoing basis. We also recommended regularly collecting feedback from staff, so to be able to really proactively identify and address issues that could be impacting employee retention and morale moving forward. And that the city continued to prioritize improvements to work culture and fostering a culture of teamwork and collaboration. Our next set of observations were related to training and development. And again, these staffing challenges are the root cause here for these challenges as well. And in part, this is because PSC experienced turnover in their public safety administrator position, so their lead position in 2023, which also created some inconsistency in the leadership and oversight that position was providing for the organization. That position was filled in November 2023, and the new public safety administrator has been able to start implementing and bring many of these things back into practice. So absolutely, I would say that the department seems to be on the right track here. But what we found here is that very few dispatchers currently are trained in all public safety disciplines. So there are 5 public safety disciplines that cross police and fire. And it's really important in a joint dispatch center where you have the consolidated model to make sure that staff are trained on all of those different disciplines so that staff can really be working together to meet the needs of the agency. Because of challenges with staffing, the department hasn't been able to get everyone trained on all of those disciplines, which makes it difficult to staff your shifts because some people can only staff certain roles at certain times. So that's a really a big priority for the city, and PSC management has implemented a plan to make sure that staff are trained by 2026 in all of the disciplines. So that's a really strong and important improvement forward, because without that cross-training, it can undermine the effectiveness of the joint model, so a big priority for the city. We also found that because of the staffing challenges, and again, because of the turnover at that leadership position, there hasn't been as consistent staff development coaching feedback that we'd really like to see. Again, that's something that PSC management is working on now that there is stability in that leadership position and those things are being implemented moving forward. And then similar with training here, the department is working to develop a really comprehensive formalized training program and has made great strides in that area, and that's just an opportunity to continue to improve. So we make recommendations in all of those areas here. I won't go over all of them, but continuing those efforts that I just spoke through. The last area I wanted to speak about was organizational performance. So we did review PSC's performance and service delivery to understand to what extent, if any, these challenges we're having on the actual service delivery of the department. We found, again, that PSC has consistently met established standards for call answering times, and that includes for state-level standards as well as the standards that PSC has set internally with the police and fire departments. And then we also found the recent survey results suggest, again, that reporting parties are generally satisfied with dispatch services. PSC does have 2 other key metrics that are really important to understand service delivery to the public. These metrics are related to police call pending times and fire call processing times. So this has to do with the time between a call being received and a call being dispatched. These are important measures, again, but there has been limitations with the data on measuring these 2 metrics that make it really difficult to understand where there might be opportunities for improvement and really where the service level is at this point in time. But given that PSC has implemented the new CAD system, which I mentioned previously, PSC management has been able to start leveraging data from that system, and the expectation is that that data will support the department in being able to more effectively measure these metrics moving forward. So that's also a strong commendation on their part in terms of looking forward on that. So again, overall, just highlighting that there have been staffing challenges that have impacted PSC's operations. What we saw was that there are actions in place to address these challenges, and adding new staff would support this continued work. That concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I know from reading the report that Sacramento and elsewhere has established standards for answering time, and you also went through that. Have those same folks established standards for process, call process?
Yes, all of the cities that we've spoken to do have standards in those areas. I don't have them off the top of my head exactly what they are, but we did see standards being established.
And so with the new system, and I realize the data is not available to look at how we're doing the political standards now. When might we be able to see, when might we have some days to see how that relates to the process?
That's a great question. I'd love to invite Lindsay to speak to that.
I'm happy to go up. Lindsay Call, I serve as the Chief Resilience Officer over Office of Emergency Management. And so I just was able to kind of, our reporting system has been challenging since the implementation of CAD. We've been able to build preliminary reports that the police department and the fire department are reviewing related to the call processing times and the call pending times. We haven't gotten any feedback from them yet, so it looks promising that those will be moving forward. We're also in the process of building more transparent dashboards and tools like that for our own monitoring and also to share that information.
Can I ask the chair, would it be possible to request either the next meeting or perhaps the meeting after the next meeting on processing standards, whether or not we're able to get that out?
Yes, we can put that on the, we can figure out how to get that on the agenda.
All right, I had just a couple of other questions. These are all people-related questions. We had a brief discussion before the meeting about where employees are sourced, so to speak, or you might encourage people to consider where in this field. When they leave, because I understand there's been a lot of turnover, where do they go? Are there other jobs or companies coming in and hiring them in the cities?
And we've had those kind of conversations with our staff members. Unfortunately, in the period between 2021 and 2023, we saw a lot of our fully cross-trained staff start leaving for other agencies. A couple different reasons why. Number one, every dispatch center in the nation pretty much became incredibly short. We started experiencing that turnover later in the pandemic than other agencies, so other agencies started raising their salaries before we had the opportunity to. So we saw a lot of our staff members who were dispatchers, who were fully cross-trained, they were a great sell for a supervisor position. So they sought promotions at other agencies locally. The other big change that we saw were staff members leaving the California area and seeking jobs in technology or in consulting or in other, moving from family reasons. So it's a CalPERS, yes, it should be comparable.
And is there any other promotional opportunities maybe outside of the dispatch center? If somebody who works 3, 5, 7 years might be able to work in their career paths?
Yeah, I would say, it's funny, I've been kind of mentoring someone who's interested in communications and outreach and giving her opportunities for social media outreach and planning ad campaigns for our team. So we very much are mindful of that. I would say there are a lot of staff members who are interested in other careers like nursing or fire inspector, other promotion opportunities, maybe management or supervisors in police department. Our administrator, who is now back in our dispatch center, she previously got promoted to a manager level position over records, dispatch, and animal control at a different police department agency. So there's a lot of movement with policy.
The last question I had, is there a language requirement to be in this
Like ability to speak more than one language? It's certainly an asset, and we have many bilingual staff members. It is not necessarily a requirement. We have the state through CalOES has a contract with an agency that provides real-time translation services for many, many languages. So we have a high tourist population in Santa Monica with
folks that speak many different languages, and so we rely on that resource heavily to provide real-time translation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is, we should answer this question. So I saw in the matrix that you provided at the end of the report, you know, that when you talked about it quite a bit, that training was an important issue. Is that training that's something we have to develop in-house because of the uniqueness of our system, or is that something that can be outsourced or purchased off the shelf or something like that? I mean, if that's something we need to do and need to do quickly, what's the impediment to that? Is it that we have to actually, because we're already short-staffed, take short staff and then train people, or is there a way to sort of outsource that?
You know, subcommittee member Davis read my mind, because that same question.
That's a scary thought.
We've been working together too long, I guess. So, I completely attached to that question. One thing that came to my mind is, why can't a more developed city, like for example Long Beach, you know, find out which city has the best training program and subcontract with that city to train. Again, completely dovetailing onto what Subcommittee Davis mentioned. Did we look at that? Is that something that we should be thinking about? Because it seems to me that this is not a core competence of the city at this point.
Happy to answer.
Yeah, I can start and then happy to have you fill in. So to answer your question, typically what we see is there is state training that's available that typically dispatchers will take. And as a post agency, which the city is, you have that training. And then typically we will also see cities themselves develop training specific to their unique geography, their unique sort of challenges and what they're dealing with. So there is sort of a mix of those things. There certainly are resources, you know, leveraging what other cities have done that can be really helpful. Lindsay, do you want to talk a little bit about your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a combination. So for our new, we've been able to hire and train 6 new dispatchers since August 2023, which is a lot for a consular. And we had refreshed our training program entirely since then. So when we onboard our new staff members, they are in a classroom environment for about a 3-month period. During that time, they go to the state's post-training where they meet all of the requirements for basic public safety dispatcher. We also are bringing in our APCO fire service training as well. It's more cost effective to have our staff trained as those trainers than try to outsource it. So we are using that model to bring that training on board. And then there is specific training for Santa Monica. So we do specific training on our Santa Monica call types. We do, and both for police and fire, we do call taking training combined now. Geography, and then our CAD system. So the challenge with outsourcing to a center like Long Beach is that they use entirely different technology than we do. So we do a lot of training on our Vesta phone processing system, how we receive 911 and non-emergency calls, and then our CAD system, computer-aided dispatch, is Versaterm. And so we've been able to do a lot of training using their training materials, right? Because we just implemented a new program, but there's a lot of specialized training. And then once folks are done with the classroom component and meeting those standards, they need experience on the floor. So they work with a trainer, they sit side by side where everybody's plugged in, and they are able to demonstrate their competency in all of the different systems. And that's a difficult thing to do. I'd also say most dispatch centers are having similar staffing challenges and aren't very willing to share their staff because they are trying to fill their own staffing needs.
And then I have.
Yes, please go ahead.
And then the other question I have is just maybe picking on my subcommittee member hat, putting on my council member hat. We do occasionally get complaints about the way the phones are answered and things like that, and I know that everything's recorded. But I'm just wondering, can you describe briefly, it's not really part of this report, but I think it does go to the staffing shortages and sort of the overall morale, for lack of a better term. You know, how do we supervise people and make sure that they're answering phones appropriately and as no doubt people here are, you know, not saying, don't worry, nobody's coming, that sort of thing. You know, so how do we supervise them once we get them on and train because of the challenges of working a lot of overtime, people get tired, you know, morale's bad. So how are we addressing that and how are we sort of, for lack of a better term, supervising folks to make sure it's not having an impact on the public facing portion of the job?
Absolutely. So we implemented a robust quality assurance program where we can review randomized phone calls for all of the dispatchers. The challenge has been, so I'm right, the challenge has been since that kind of 2021 period, our staffing has been so challenging that we had to have our supervisors answering phone calls and doing radio traffic to be able to meet the staffing standards, minimum staffing standards in our service level agreements. And so we are returning to a sense of normalcy where our supervisors have more administrative time to be able to complete those quality assurance reviews. But for a long period, or for that time period, it wasn't done as robustly as we had wanted. It was done more on that complaint base. You know, if somebody submitted a complaint, which we certainly did, you know, occasionally, then we would use that scorecard to evaluate the complaint to see if it was founded or not. The other thing that we've implemented is a new system called Spider in partnership with the police department. So it sends, one of the most frequent complaints that I've received is I called and nothing happened. Nobody ever was dispatched, nobody ever came, right? And so this is connected to our CAD system where it sends the reporting party if they used a cell phone and if it's a non-high priority call, like they're not going to be in danger for receiving text. It will send them a confirmation that their call for service has been placed, and it will send them a delay text and a confirmation of the officer arrived or what happened, right? It's generic, but at least it demystifies the process and people don't feel like their call went into a black hole. So that has been helpful. It also provides a survey 24/7 or 24 hours after the call for service is complete. And we've been able to get proactive feedback that way, right? A lot of times we've only been able to receive, you know, the 17 complaints a year that go to your desk or to your box desk, and it's not necessarily reflective of the overall work of an individual or the entire team. And so while we look at those complaints very thoroughly and coach and counsel and discipline as needed, this is more reflective. And then we're able to do the call audio review on those individuals that said that they are very dissatisfied with the service they receive from dispatch.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
I have one.
Thanks, that's all I have.
Subcommittee Brock.
Did we, when this system was first implemented and for several years afterward, I would get individual complaints from police or fire.
Which system are you referring to?
The dispatch system. And
The CAD?
Joint dispatch.
The CAD, the automated system?
No, joint dispatch.
Okay.
There's a different question here. So we used to get a lot of complaints from police and fire that the dispatchers didn't really understand. And I know you've dealt with a lot of that and solved it. But I had a question whether, what's the percentage of departments in California that use a joint dispatch versus still use an individual dispatch? That's the first question.
I don't know the exact percentage, but there aren't many.
That use joint?
The joint dispatch.
And
There are or no?
There are not. And my other question then was, what are the drawbacks of this system versus police and fire departments using a traditional dispatch system? And have we ever really looked, and maybe during this audit we did, what's a better system for Santa Monica to be using? What is the best delivery system to make sure that police calls, fire calls are dispatched accurately? So is this system, bottom line, is this system worth having? Or would it be better to go back to an individual department dispatch system?
We have seen the joint dispatch center model work really effectively in other cities that we've worked with. And in the research that we did and read about these sorts of models, it does work. The types of challenges that PSC is experiencing with staffing, with the turnover, with trouble filling vacancies, those sorts of things are common across any dispatch center. So they're not necessarily a symptom of it being a consolidated model. I think that there are pros and cons to any model, but we didn't necessarily see anything that would suggest this model isn't working because of the model. It was more just some of the other challenges, and if we're able to address the staffing issues and then in turn be able to address training and whatnot, the model would be able to be more effective.
So
Do you want to add?
no, go ahead.
Yeah, so when we met with city leadership, we also met with the fire chief and the police chief to ask that question of, has this been resolved? We heard that this was a challenge over time, and we heard overwhelmingly that the cooperation, the collaboration, the partnership with OEM has really improved and is at a really good place right now, and that there is interest in keeping this joint model, and one of the key reasons why is that it provides superior service for community members that are calling in. So that you pick up 911, what's your emergency? That same person that picks up is the person that can get you help, rather than saying, okay, please hold. Okay, something emergency is happening, please hold, we'll send you to the right dispatcher. And that's what happens when you don't have a joint dispatch center. So the sense is that it is overwhelmingly a superior service to be able to provide at the city of Santa Monica, and that it's working, and that it's an investment that the city has made, that the city will continue to make to provide that level of service, that investment is worth it for the members of this community.
Thank you so much for that answer. I appreciate it.
Just following up on that question, however, if it's an investment, does that mean that it has a higher set of prerequisites to be successful? And if so, was that considered when it was adopted? In other words, are we running something that is staffed and resourced at the level of an individual dispatch system, but we've actually signed up for something that's more complex and requires actually more investment?
So the investment is really on the training front to be able to get employees up to speed. And the way that PSC has designed its training program is that it's tiered, and so it's an investment in terms of time, but it's not necessarily more difficult for any one individual to be successful at that. It just takes additional time to get them to be able to be trained on all 5 disciplines.
So what you're saying, however, is that turnover has a disproportionate impact on our effectiveness than it would have if it was not a joint dispatch center. Because it would be easier and faster to train up individuals in a non-joint scenario than it is in a joint scenario.
So we put individuals into staffing when they've completed 3 of the skill sets. So as soon as they're trained up on a skill set, they can do overtime, right? And for example, like our 4 new trainees just started to do their fire and police call taking in training, but they're taking calls and they're already in the staffing model, etc. I would say to answer your question about the investment is when this, in my opinion, when this concept was implemented before I got here, it was not properly staffed to be able to set up the existing personnel well.
What year was that?
Training, 2015. And so, if I could redo things differently, I just had a conversation, I'm good, bad, and ugly, I'll tell it like this, is that you need to bump up your staff at the very beginning of a consolidation to train everybody up front so that you can focus on new hire training. The staffing model was just-in-time training where there were staffing issues from the very beginning. And so we have been playing catch-up since 2015.
That's 9 years.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been very, very challenging. We were at a really good spot in 2019, and then the floor fell in. And so, but I will say we are stronger for it. The amount of work we have done in partnership with Human Resources to overhaul our recruitment process and to pay our dispatchers what they deserve, I'm really proud of that work.
So how much of the training is unique to Santa Monica? How much of it is generic that could be provided by other agencies?
I would say there's a lot of nuance. I would say that there's about a month of dispatch that we outsource, and we outsource a lot of it now to the state. The penal code call types and things like that is standardized across the board. But how the police department and the fire department have specifically created their responses, what call types they've assigned, what priority levels, that is under their control. And so there's a lot
and
of...
that's unique to Santa Monica?
Yes.
All right. So is the CAD system that we implemented, is that an industry standard system, or is that something that is unique to Santa Monica?
No, it's an industry standard, and we're very, very thankful that we've implemented that.
But didn't we just hear that there were challenges with that system because it's unique to Santa Monica?
So it is not unique in many different dispatch centers, but there are probably about 5 CAD vendors that are used throughout dispatch centers in the nation. And so there are certain agencies that do use it, right? And like Santa Barbara, et cetera, but it's not every jurisdiction does not use the same CAD, and they do not speak to each other. So our CAD, we can't transfer calls to a different dispatch center that also uses the Versaterm system. Similarly, we cannot transfer 911 calls, our call processing.
I'm thinking more of just training, right?
Yeah.
In other words, we don't have a unique system that requires a specific Santa Monica training thing. It's a mainstream system that can be serviced with mainstream training, right? Is that correct? Is that correct statement?
Correct.
Okay.
And I will say we did outsource when we implemented our CAD training for all of our current hires. The city did make a smart move and paying for the vendor to provide that training to our existing dispatcher staff instead of using staffing resources to do that work. Just kind of like you said, to relieve the burden on our staff.
So one question I have is, given all of the Moss Adams red flags of personnel and turnover and staffing, somehow, however, we've managed to meet all the established standards. So the question is, are these standards like the bare minimum standards, or are these best in class standards? I mean, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out if we have such organizational challenges in this area, how is it that we're able to meet all of the, call standards?
I can speak a little bit to that and then pass to Lindsay. So these are the state standards, so that certainly is sort of the expectation across the state for their standards. And then the standard that PSCF set internally was aligned with all the peers that we reviewed, and it's pretty common, the 90% standard. So that's pretty typical. I think, from what we saw, and then again, Lindsay, feel free to add onto this, having supervisors on the floor, right? Kind of adjusting operations to be able to focus fully on service delivery, and some of these other things like training and some of the supervision and things have to, they're still important, but we have to focus on having people on the floor first. Would you like to add to that?
I agree with that. And So we have the CalOES standards, which is just for non-emergency calls. And then we evaluate, we set a higher standard for ourselves, and then we also evaluate our non-emergency call answer times. And that demonstrates our dispatchers triaging calls effectively. On the fire call processing times, there is the NFPA standard for certain call types like choking, cardiac arrest, structured fires. From the data I reviewed, we're meeting those standards as well. That's an industry standard. And then the fire department also has a standard that we're close to meeting. And then the police department also has their standards. Your point to we've adapted to be able to continue to provide that level of service is exactly correct. We've been having to mandate overtime in order to have the staffing to be able to meet those requirements, so that we're not seeing a dip in customer service for our residents. We've been forcing our staff to work that overtime, our supervisors to be in staffing, et cetera, and make those changes. All of those decisions were not done in a silo. Those were done in consultation with our executive committee, with the police, fire chiefs. So it was a joint decision to do those types of staffing changes.
Okay. You mentioned that there was a survey of customers, i.e. residents or people who have been calling in. Was that a statistically valid survey, or was that simply an anecdotal survey?
So that survey is the survey Lindsay was speaking to that is sent out to folks who call into the call center.
And what was the response rate on that survey?
So just thinking not about that specific sample size, but typically it's around 15% of all the individuals who receive the survey answer it. Now, I don't know if it's those people who want to answer the survey, answer the survey.
Okay, so that survey may or may not be reflective of what the actual customer experience that the residents.
I understand that, but it's better than any data we've ever had in the past. So it's a starting point.
Would a statistically valid survey be something that should be part of the recommendation, so that we actually understand what the end user attitudes are towards this?
Completing a statistically valid survey of all folks who called in, when you could have a significant number of those being out of the country or from hotels or from businesses, could be extremely challenging. It's not work that we have seen undertaken in other agencies to be able to make that recommendation.
Okay, I mean, at my house, every evening, especially on weekends, I go to bed with the sounds of sirens. So, I was looking at the number of dispatchers, supervisors, and you had the ratios. Does this also kind of take into consideration the complexity of the calls and the complexity and the volume of calls? That was a question I had with this, because I mean, you can have the supervisors and dispatchers, but as far as calls per dispatcher and that kind of thing, are there metrics like that? If there are, where does Santa Monica stand on that, as far as, to get a sense as to, Murrieta is going to be I would imagine, a lot simpler and less, and lower volumes than what Santa Monica is. So did we look at that?
It is not recommended for dispatch agencies to do that type of analysis because of those same factors that you just spoke to. So that's why we have the state formula and the Erlang C formula to be able to make those staffing recommendations. So the staffing, the matrix around just supervisory staff is just what other agencies have without doing that comparison of complexity or call volume or things like that, because it really is independent for each individual jurisdiction.
I get that, but if you have call volumes per staff person, then and you have this, and the turnover is different, then it could actually surface different issues, right?
But our formula that we use for our minimum staffing levels, for our service level agreements, which is the CalOES report, we put in what our target call answer time is and how many, like what standards we want to hold ourselves to, how many required radio positions we have, and then it provides us with that minimum staffing recommendation. So it does take into consideration the number of calls we receive and how quickly we want to receive them.
Specifically for Santa Monica.
Yes, just using Santa Monica's piece out.
Okay, so there was a table in here about the number of the disciplines and how many people were trained in each of the disciplines. And so police call taking, 100% were trained. Police north seat, 70%. Police hot seat, 50%. Are these statistics that we should be concerned about? Only 50% of the people are trained in police hot seat?
I think this is a priority recommendation that PSC has been working on, is getting staff fully trained, and Lindsay can speak more to this, but they have a plan to get staff fully trained by 2026.
So the reason it's 100% for PD call taking is that it's by and large our highest workload, right? We have way more police calls than fire calls, and also calls for service for the police department. So police north seat is a radio position. It's our second radio position. They also do call taking, and they run license plates. They check for warrants, things like that. So those are the duties that person has to complete. Our police hot seat is the highest specialty, so that is the primary police radio dispatcher. It's a very, very stressful job. And so that's why there's a lower level. It's our more tenured police department. It's the one that scares the former fire department dispatchers the most. For fire call taking and fire
Does that impact the police's ability to provide services to the residents?
No. We will always have a police primary radio dispatcher. Absolutely.
Right.
And
so that's basically an indicator where the overtime is.
And we spell, well, not necessarily, but we spell that out in our service level agreement.
Okay.
I would say, so we've implemented a new piece of technology called active guide cards. We use them for medical and fire calls now, but it will be an electronic system for both fire and police and emergency medical services, where it is a question card and you click yes, no, and there's it gives you kind of the next step and the next step and the next step. It reports that the dispatcher is doing, here's the information that they got, this was what they clicked on the screen, there's better quality assurance that way. Our expectation, we're first rolling it out with the fire department, our fire and EMS calls. We will then be doing it for the police department to speed up that training as well. It won't help with the radio dispatch focus, but it will give us quicker training times on call taking. The biggest challenge with our cross-training numbers is we haven't had the staff. Staff have been working so much overtime to fill the staffing requirements that we can't get them to be able to do more overtime to do training. I would have no staff if I made them cross-train at the same time. So, but we're very thankful that staffing is stabilized to the point where we'll be able to pick that up again. We're going to incorporate the cross-training schedule as part of our shift selection process in November 2024.
Okay, I apologize, I have two more questions. One, the call volumes peaked, they were highest in 2019. They were, again, close to 2019 in 2021, and they've dropped 20% since 2019 and 17% since 2021. But the overtime hasn't dropped commensurately. So the call volumes are going down, the overtime isn't going down.
So I would say the bulk of the drop is in our non-emergency call volume. So those higher acuity 911 calls have stayed pretty constant. They've even slightly gone back up. We've had a big dip in 2020, 2021 because of the pandemic, but those are trending upwards. The non-emergency calls, we've been working with our partner agencies to reallocate some of those to 311 or to our online police record service system, so that people are getting, better care for graffiti calls or other trash pickups and things like that, where they don't need to be calling police and fire dispatcher. Now, the decrease, the call statistic that we use, the staffing statistic that we use to get how many staff members for minimum staffing only looks at 911 call volume. And so that has remained fairly consistent throughout the years.
911 is down, it's down, it's down 25% from what it was in 19. And it's down about...
Solid crime.
Well, now here's the interesting thing on the data. This is my last point on the data. It just seemed odd to me. So basically, call volumes have gone down from 330,000 to 265,000. 330,000 in 19, 265 in 23. It's just a 20% drop since 19. But when you look at the call shares, and you look at 911, you look at non-emergency, and then you look at outgoing, the shares almost haven't moved. So I find it odd that basically in the data, that the shares of the types of calls doesn't move at all. And yet the call volumes are going down, which leads me to believe that there could be something wrong in I don't know how accurate the data is, because it's hard to believe that you're going to have that kind of drop in call volumes, and yet you're going to have, like, non-emergency calls stays right at the 50% range throughout all the years.
Mark?
Yes?
Just if there's a break there. I would presume the call volume dropped because of the amount of tourists, the amount of workforce dropped as well.
No, I'm not. That's not my point. My point is that the shares haven't moved. So even though the calls drop, each type of call drops almost exactly in the same ratio, which is odd. So that's what's very odd. So because we were just saying it's almost 911. So when you looked at the data, how happy are you that the data is being properly generated by the systems?
So the 911 calls in fiscal year 19, it was 79,632. In fiscal year 2023, it was 78,761. So it's actually stayed steady. It's decreased 1%.
That's correct. My point is, as a share,
26.
The point is the shares haven't moved. So 911 has remained at, it was 24%, it's gone to 27%, it's 29%, but you've got outgoing calls are 23%, and they stay at 20, 23, 22, and non-emergency is 52, 57, 55. In other words, everything moves in almost the exact same ratios, which seems extraordinarily odd. So anyways, we're not going to solve it this evening, but I'm just saying that, when you're looking at the data, I don't know if, we are happy that the data is, how valid the data is that's coming out of the system, so that we can actually make proper decisions using that data. And I would suggest that, as we look at this stuff, we make sure that, there's enough controls on the data that
And it's not our, so the state, it's a Cal OES system that we have a login to, and that system provides every PSAP in the state with those reports. We have no control to edit those reports.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
We should just know, however, that.
Just sharing that. I don't think that the crime report profile or the medical and fire emergency profile of the city has drastically changed from 2019 to now. And so I would think that those calls would remain fairly consistent with the Part 1 crimes that the city has been experiencing, or the misdemeanor crimes that the city has been experiencing, the number of medical emergencies that people have been experiencing.
I'll give you the chart so you can
Yeah.
just have it.
Okay.
I realize we're running out of time. Are there any other questions? I think I've sucked all the oxygen out of the air for this topic. Any other questions? With no other questions, can we get a motion to accept and file the report?
I'll move.
Second.
Voice vote, please.
Aye.
Yep.
With a question of you, and that is to get the update on the processing time. Does that need to go in the motion?
Would you like to make a motion about that?
Well, I think what you should do is you should accept and file the report, and then you can subsequently give direction to staff.
Yes, thank you.
Not as part of.
Very good. So let's have a voice vote on this. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Would you like to make a motion?
Okay, well, I'd like to request that staff provide an update at the next meeting on the processing times and the data that's being used for the processing time. Call process.
So the motion would be that we would, the staff returns to the audit subcommittee in the next meeting with an update on processing times.
Processing times of the calls that are
All
received.
processing times, right.
And I guess the question is, because the reason we don't have that now is because of the new system, is the next meeting enough time to get that? Or do you need
3
more
months.
time with the new system?
So it should be enough time. We are setting new benchmarking standards with the police department as part of their strategic planning process as well. So there's a bit of back and forth there. But we can at least provide you with kind of a status report and what the data that we do have. I feel confident on the fire side of it. Just need a couple tweaks on the side.
And I would like to amend a friendly amendment to that motion, which would be also add an update on the system that is sending out confirmations to the callers. What is that called?
Spider.
The Spider. So if we could get an update on the implementation of that system or the coverage of calls that system is able to cover, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
So can we read that, our motion?
Motion by Vice Chair Bush, seconded by Chair Verbal to request that staff return to the next meeting with an update on the process of collecting data, call volume. and-
Call volume response time.
Yeah, but processing,
Call processing times.
Okay, so return to the next meeting with an update on call volume processing.
No,
Call
processing.
processing.
No volumes, no volumes.
Sorry, call processing times.
Perfect.
And then there was another motion to,
Friendly amendment.
a friendly amendment to return with an update on the implementation of the spider system.
Yeah, text update.
Text message update system.
Perfect.
So I have a motion and a second.
Yes, just a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. Okay, the next item is my favorite one, CalPERS preliminary investment returns update. I think that is the esteemed Randy. If we can get the staff report on that, please.
Sure. Wanted to give you an update on the CalPERS investment returns for 2024. Oh, okay. CalPERS has released a preliminary investment return, 9.3% for fiscal 2024. If you recall, CalPERS normally estimates that there's, or projects that there's going to be a 6.8% return on investments. So that's 2.5 points, or 37% better than what was estimated. Oh, there we go. If you'll remember, this schedule shows historical rates of returns, and again, this is the 2009 real estate crash. This was a tremendous pandemic. Everybody was probably at home trading away. So we had 21.3% return, and the following year, everybody got back to work and stopped trading, so it was 6.1. And just the previous year, 2023, was 5.8%. So 9.3% is terrific. So two things it has an effect on: the unfunded liability and also future contributions. So I did kind of a back of the envelope schedule. We took the value of the CalPERS portfolio at the end of 23. At 6.8%, we would have projected $122 million of investment income. At 9.3%, we think it's going to be around $168 million. So that's about a $45 million difference. So what's the estimated impact over the $45 million? Well, first of all, it's not for contributions. It's amortized over 20 years. And on top of that, it's ramped up. So in the first year that the contributions are effective, it's only 20% of 45 by 20. It'll ultimately get to about $2 million a year less contribution than what would have happened if we had a 6.8% return.
And our contributions are what? They're like 20 million a year, 20, 30 million a year?
So there's the contribution related to the unfunded liability, and then there's a contribution related to normal cost. Normal cost is the cost that every employee here, what they earn during that year.
Right, and that 2 million is going to be applicable to which one?
Oh, that's applicable to the amortization of the unfunded liability.
And so, so as a percentage of that annual amount, it's going to reduce the contribution by 2 million, which is what percentage?
Right. So, my slide's not on here. So this is the miscellaneous plan only. So the unfunded liability amortization is 29 million. So that I would have to go look up what the police and fire are, but they're much smaller. But that's the portion of the contribution that approximately 2 million a year would affect.
All right, so I mean, all in, those contributions are those contributions all in together are about 48 million a year. Police, fire, and miscellaneous. So it'd be like 2 million. Okay. So it's 2 million on the 48 million.
Probably thereabouts.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Unfortunately, my slide's up, but I was trying to show you that this is how the base gets amortized. So every time there's an investment return difference, that's one line item, and then there'll be non-investment return differences, and that's a second line item. But all these differences will be what comprises the amortization of the unfunded liability.
Just back to Mark's question, does that also give us a benefit in that we're not paying interest or as much interest on the unfunded liability? In other words, if you're paying like a mortgage, if you pay a little bit extra beyond your mandatory mortgage.
Indirectly, yes. So you have to think of the pension as two components: the total assets in the pension plan and the total liabilities. So the total liabilities accrue interest at 6.8%. But because now the assets that we have are a little bit higher than what was projected, then the net unfunded liability does get a little bit smaller.
So every year, the interest applied to that unfunded liability, the gross amount of interest would actually be lower because it's a lower amount, which over time will be significant.
For that 1 year. Because the unfunded liability goes up and down based on what the returns are for the asset, and also actuarial assumption changes in the total liability. Now, remember that the investment returns are only one component of the changes in the contribution to the unfunded liability. So they have what are called non-investment gains and losses, and the two big ones are mortality, how long people live, and the other one is inflation as well. So that's pretty much it. Any questions? Oh, yeah. Any questions?
Any questions? We have no questions. All right. We have a motion to accept and file the pension update report.
I'll move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Randy. Okay. Problem, I'm still a paper-based guy. Shows my age. It's all right. I'm almost obsolete. So can we get a progress report? Next item is progress report and findings and observations of internal audit. And that is presented by Oscar, our Director of Finance.
Yes, sir. So we do an update every quarter, every time we meet, on the progress on all the findings. This time we're reporting that there was one item that was completed in this quarter, but there was work that was done, so I'm going to go through it.
Okay.
We still have 87% of them that have been implemented, and 6% in progress, 6% pending of all the findings. So fleet efficiency, while there was no major progress to report, staff is developing an annual customer survey that will inform policy development, and it'll be ready to be sent out to the customers from fleet. Staff is also developing KPI report and service level agreements for the asset management system, and that will create some kind of dashboard to be presented in terms of utilization efficiency. Fleet utilization, staff is updating policies pertaining to transportation and cost analysis, as well as vehicle assignments, and the end date for this project will be moved to the end of 2024. So there is work being done, it's just no major progress to report. Same thing here, no major progress to report, but we've hired a chief information officer now. Farouk started 2 months ago, a month ago? A month ago. A month ago. And he's working now on establishing a technology governance framework for our technology. That's in the works. ISD is also working to move us to the hybrid cloud infrastructure environment for our servers. That's 90% completed, and it should be completed by the quarter 4 of 2024. They're also working on the IT asset management system, implementation of the system, which should be completed by quarter 4 of 2024. On the HR organizational assessment, no major updates to report. Staff is focused on ongoing efforts that were already implemented. One example is on quarter 4 of 2023, 50% of the projects were still open. We made a significant progress in quarter 1 of 2024. We moved up to 80%. Currently, since there's transition of leadership going on in HR right now, staff is focused on providing essential services and just focus on services without major interruptions. Additionally, the city has filled the Human Resources Director position. Dana will be starting on October 6th of 2024. And they'll continue moving on forward on the progress. the projects. For the mobility division assessment, two primary things were completed. We've hired a chief planning officer who's instrumental to the strategic planning work and including the mobility division work. So they'll be creating the strategic plan for the department. Also, the Department of Transportation will be preparing their first annual report, which will highlight mobility division's accomplishment metrics and also the transportation impact fees plan. The report is expected to be completed by the end of 2024. On the permitting efficiency study, again, no major changes to report. Council awarded a new contract for the permitting and land management system, which will be implemented within an 18-month implementation timeline. And then the remaining implementation tasks related to this will be contingent upon the implementation of the system, at which point they'll continue to address the rest of the tasks. Council staff will seek council approval as well to continue to maintain the city's system for electronic plan sharing and markup, and also to provide which gathers client feedback. So we'll go to council for that authorization of that contract. Also, there was some recent amendments to the zoning ordinance, which now allows for establishments that provide massages to be located closer together, and this aligns to the broader permitting efficiency goals.
Oscar, was there some press releases related to that?
There was a press release related to the permitting and land management system. Yeah, but you'll see a staff report about the project docs, the electronic plan sharing system that will be going to council.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On this permitting? Was there? I seem to recall that the planning department was trying to develop their own in-house system on a part-time basis several years ago. Is that what this is?
That was being discussed. This is not an in-house developed system. This is
but it's the same issue.
It's a new permitting system. It's precisely the same issue, but we're not doing it.
So you moved away from an in-house kind of part-time thing, and you're engaging a standard package.
An off-the-shelf package that's used by other cities.
That's a fantastic outcome. Okay, great.
Yeah, so we hired an implementation partner as well as a software company that we licensed. And then on the airport property leasing, so there's continued efforts on cross-training staff across multiple functions to increase efficiency and improve the workload balance. They've also created a central repository of training materials for staff, which is shared in the division. There's also been collaboration between ISD and facilities on the work order system to improve customer service and streamline billing. And that full implementation of the system is expected on Q4 2025. There's also ongoing efforts to inventory on-site mechanical equipment, including tracking serial numbers, projected end-of-life dates for the equipment, as well as developing a facility maintenance plan. And this will be included as part of the 5-year CIP plan, and the completion date for that is expected to be completed by December 2024.
We say it's going to be part of the 5-year plan. What's going to be completed in 2024?
It's the facility maintenance plan. It's going to be incorporated to the CIP 5-year plan.
And it's going to be completed in?
The plan in December of 2024.
December, so this coming December. It'll be in the 5-year plan, but it'll be done in December.
So they'll do an assessment of the facilities, a complete assessment of the facilities, identify deferred maintenance to inform their capital improvement program.
Okay, got it.
For this one, the capital asset internal control testing, revised city-wide policy has been started to be created. There's no major progress to report. And there's estimated completion date of June of 2025 for this.
And how does this relate to the capital process that we're doing here?
Not sure how it's related, but I can let me offer that.
To the Moss Adams study?
This is, yeah, I'll find out. I'm not exactly sure how it's related to Los Adams.
That would be great to know.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not quite, because, I mean, can Moss Adams use this?
Illuminated is this LSLs or being.
I'm not
This
sure.
is the Moss Adams findings.
The Moss
It's
Adams.
called up on the Moss Adams findings.
Yeah.
This was about recording your capital assets.
Okay.
The bookkeeping for capital assets.
I'll have to go back. I think it's very different. I can make sure that anything that's open from the prior that's applicable for our lens is incorporated.
Right, but I mean, to the extent that they were testing the accuracy of the recording, that would dovetail into your reporting side.
I have to check. Like it could be fixed assets. It could be
Exactly. I think it's different. You're thinking the capital project program rather than the capital asset. These are assets.
Right.
It's assets.
But he's testing assets that are in process as well as completed. Anyways, can we just figure out how these things
Yeah.
mesh together?
They should be very different because we'll confirm that, but they will be very different because in 2023 I've been a part of it. It's a very different workflow team that's doing the procedures. So we'll confirm. But
Okay.
That's it. So the updates.
So, I mean, how are you going to update us on this thing as to what the impact, if any, is with the new Moss Adams project? And is that something in the next meeting that you can update us with?
On what other projects?
On this project versus theirs?
Oh, in the next meeting I can bring it up. I'll
Do I
give
need
you
to
an
put
update.
that? Do I need to put that in the as a motion? Yeah, let's put that as a motion.
May I ask the chair a question first? In a prior meeting, maybe the last meeting, you passed out a spreadsheet tool which you had applied
Thank you.
for capital planning.
Thank you for reminding me.
So I'm confused. How does that relate to that which relates to this?
So, thank you for reminding me. What I would like in the Moss Adams item here that we were discussing, I wanted to ask that question that you got. So, in the Moss Adams report that's going to come out on the capital budget and capital project management, I would like to get a specific acknowledgement as to how close, if at all, the process includes the reporting in that template that was handed out in the last meeting, which I believe I emailed you the soft copy of that when we had
and I
our chat.
reviewed it. There are many or all of those elements in that template that are aligned with best practices. GFOA will enhance what's currently there. So like, for example, like when we spoke schedules one-on-one, which we would expect. But I think that schedule had budget, EAC, forecast.
That schedule being my schedule.
Yeah, the one that you sent? So I
Yes.
think a lot of the
It
components.
had budget, actuals, estimate to complete, estimated final cost, prior estimated final cost,
Yeah.
variance between.
From a project and.
Correct.
So
And by line item.
Yeah,
And-
so all those components are built within GFOA's recommendations, which will be our recommendations. So we'll take what your current level of reporting is. The template you said, I'll have to do a full analysis, but it aligns with best practice because it takes the project as a whole. It has those KPIs, but GFOA also has additional KPIs to consider, like schedule, I think would be critical, the description of the project, change order consideration. So I think what you gave will answer on that.
All right, so you're making a representation that will be incorporated in your report.
We will recommend similar KPIs that are within that template. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we need to reflect that in the motion or is that good enough?
I think that they're saying that they are incorporating that in their report as a standard part of the report. Is that correct?
We will, let me make sure I'm understanding. I don't think we'll endorse the template, but I think we could note that the template is provided includes KPIs that are consistent for 6 out of 10 or whatever. But we recommend 10 out of 10. You know, and then management would have to decide if they want to include schedule, we're going to have a description, and enhance it. But I think with the template we could use a good baseline for whatever template you guys create. I don't think we're going to.
I don't want to be prescriptive. All I want to do is make sure that the information that's in there is part of what you're reporting on. And what you're telling me is that it's your standards include all of that information that was on that template plus additional information. And that standard is what you're going to be using in your final report.
Correct. So whatever the gaps are from that template you provided, they would just need enhancement to it that you guys can consider on what level of detail you guys want to get.
We'll evaluate reporting according to GFOA best practices.
GFOA.
In general.
And you're saying GFOA best practices includes everything that was in that template plus other stuff?
Correct.
Okay.
So is the motion then to see how this effort matches up?
No. Yeah. So then we get back to the original motion, which is what's the relationship between the project that you just described and the project that they're working on?
Oscar, could that be the airport study?
No, it was a fixed asset
It's a fixed
study,
asset.
so
Fixed
that wasn't
assets.
looking at capital.
It's looking for fixed assets.
Yeah,
Capital.
fixed assets, so that was more so about.
Cars, trucks.
It just said
It
capital
It
assets.
was about cars, trucks,
Right.
equipment that's valuable.
Right, it was assets,
and
not
allocating
programs.
those components. What was that?
It was assets, not programs. In other words, we have capital programs,
assets,
and we have
correct.
capital assets.
Well, the programs would create the
No,
assets.
not necessarily. Capital program is like parks, you know, and things like that.
Yeah, that's an asset.
The asset, well, but the asset is like a truck.
No. When it's self-constructed, like the pier bridge is going to be a project that will end up being an asset.
Correct.
They are maintained a little bit differently, so Councilmember Davis is correct in that differentiation. A capital program is constructing something or renovating something or undertaking a significant project. It's not purchasing a truck. Whereas the fixed assets that were evaluated did include things like fleet and trucks and potentially even hardware that could be valuable. I didn't work on that engagement, but those are the types of fixed assets that we typically will evaluate in that type of internal audit, is those sort of like the durable items, the heavy equipment, the heavy machinery. Those are capital assets. The capital program is the construction.
Okay, so tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't you just figure out what was going on and email me? And if we see that there's a lot of confusion, we can always put it on the agenda for the next audit subcommittee meeting. How's that?
Sure.
So this way we don't get ourselves too administratively tied up in notes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. All right. Did we take care of this item? No, we stopped halfway. Accepting Oscar's report. Did we accept Oscar's report?
Not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. All right. So is there a motion to accept the internal audit status report?
I move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, last item on the agenda. I feel like Karnak with the last
Now
question.
you really are old.
I'm telling you.
Just so you know, you said you were almost old. Now you're officially old.
Show of hands as to who knows who Karnak is. Karnak. Oh,
I'm
exactly.
getting older by the minute, so let's.
Item 6 on the agenda. The chair has asked for the discussion of 2 items to be included in the next audit subcommittee meeting. And so the idea here is to discuss this and then take a vote as to whether or not we all agree that we would like to see this discussed in the next audit subcommittee meeting. So the first item Overview and status on the recommendation of the Moss Adams homeless study related to observations and recommendations in Section A, strategy and planning, data collection and analysis. In that section, in the Moss Adams report, which is now over a year old, I believe it was December of 22. So I'm losing track of time. It's longer than that. No. Was it December 21, 22? Almost a year.
22.
Almost a year. What I'd like to know is, so in there were data issues. We had let go staff, we had let go analysts, data managers, and this was surrounding the HMIS database. And the HMIS database was documented in the report as being instrumental in how the city looks at and allocates funds to its homeless services providers. There's been, I will be honest, I did a public records request. The numbers came out from that request. I did 2 of those requests, and they kind of trailed off and disappeared around 2022, which kind of dovetails with the Moss Adams finding that there was a lot of work to be done in that area. So I would like to, this item is requesting that in the next audit subcommittee meeting, the staff in that area presents to the audit subcommittee what's happening on the data, the HMIS data, the HMIS system, and how it stands as far as issues related to mitigating the issues that Moss Adams has identified, and how that system is being brought up to speed so that it can be useful to the city. So that's the motion, which is to include a staff presentation on the HMIS system and this data planning and analysis section of the Moss Adams report in the next audit subcommittee meeting. So with that, I believe that is an extraordinarily important part of the city's ability to manage what is a critical issue facing the city and the staff. So can we read the motion, and then we can take see if somebody wants to second it.
Might need help cleaning this up, but looks like the motion is to return to the next meeting with the status on the recommendation of the whole city. Chair Burble is requesting that Housing and Human Services staff come to report on this to provide an update on the HMIS system and data analysis on mitigating issues.
Tell you what, why don't we just say staff to report on the status of the issues raised in the Moss Adams report as we have related to the observations and recommendations, Section A, strategy and planning, data collection and analysis. Just the issues that were raised in that specific section, and that encompasses HMIS and the other issues.
So the motion is just to have staff come and report on this, and it's specifically about the homeless city related to the observations and recommendations, Section 8, strategy plan, and data collection analysis.
Yes.
Okay, so that is our first motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Can we have a voice vote, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. The second one is going to be, and this kind of dovetails, it's too bad LSL is out right now, but there has been some press around the internal controls around council getting the appropriate request for approval on projects. And so what I would like to understand is the internal audit work that has been done, the actual testing that has been done in this area, and just get a summary from, is it LSL or is it Moss Adams?
Moss Adams.
From Moss Adams. So simply a report on the Moss Adams testing of the internal controls around the procurement process that leads up to council approval of all expenditures over $250,000.
I believe that would need to be a separate engagement within our work plan.
What this request is simply to report on what work, if any, has been done.
You want to know what our existing auditor is doing, right?
Yes, whichever audit, whether it's LSL or it's Moss Adams, but whoever is testing this area,
Okay, yeah, the testing, yes, the LSL.
that's LSL. Okay.
Can I ask a question? I mean, what
They're
is
testing.
You must read a different press than I do. What's the issue here?
The issue is that in one of the stories that something should have been presented to council and wasn't presented to council. So I simply want to know, and this is an issue that has been brought up before, probably by myself, on the internal controls to getting everything through that should be formally approved by council. So I just want to know what testing in this area has been done. It should be a very short conversation, but I still want to know, has testing been done in this area, and if so, to what degree? And that's really the request here.
We'll talk to you, LSL.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's
So
with,
that's going to be LSL.
LSL.
Okay.
So the motion is basically to have, this is incorrectly worded now, the motion is to have our external auditors, LSL, present a summary of their internal controls testing on the procurement process leading up through council approval of items, of relevant items in accordance with existing financial policies.
Can I ask for a clarification? You're not asking them to do additional testing?
No, I just want to know.
You just want a summary of the testing?
I just want to know a summary of the testing.
I just want to make sure that we're not sending our external auditors off to do an expensive...
No. I just want to know what they've done. And if they come back and say, we've done nothing, then we can have that debate.
They've already told us something. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't asking for them to do
No.
additional work.
No, this is just, I just want to know, I want to set the baseline.
Okay, just want that to be clear in my own mind.
I really am sad that you can read my mind on this one.
Yeah, well, after the first time I put up a lead plate.
Can we read the motion?
Motion to have the external auditor present a summary of their internal control testing on the procurement process leading up to council approval of items of relevant items for the system. So, sorry, I was trying to use my transcription, but
Just substitute external auditor for internal auditor.
yes. So external auditor.
Summary of their existing internal control testing.
So the motion is for the external auditor to present a summary of their internal.
Of their existing internal control testing and findings.
Internal control testing and findings.
Right, on the procurement process, the rest of it as it's written.
To ensure council approves all expenditures over $200,000.
Right, so this is to be in the next audit subcommittee meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. That was a staff presentation. I think we had the questions. And I believe that we're adjourning the meeting at 8:37. Thank you. Oh, early meetings.
Thank God.
Oh, we're gonna pay for it.
This is interesting. This is not, that has nothing to do with the actual numbers. This is just that they test the process to make sure that the people can't start, slipping things under the table.
in a